Good evening and welcome to our discussion on building resiliency for climate change. Tonight's session is the second of a 6-meeting series on bay and coastal flooding and fire risk mitigation in our county. It's my pleasure to welcome you on behalf of the Leagues of Women Voters of San Mateo County. I am Marie Baldessari, the president of the League of Women Voters of North and Central San Mateo County. And my co-host is Tracy Clark. She is the president of the League of Women Voters of South San Mateo County. This series is a meeting co-sponsored by OneShoreline, the San Mateo County Flood and Sea Level Rise Resiliency District. The League of Women Voters is well known as a nonpartisan organization whose mission is to help educate our communities on critical public issues. And to that end, the League is delighted to undertake for the first time a countywide community discussion series on the impacts of sea level rise and wildfires in order to plan our community's response. These discussions will focus specifically on geographical areas that have different potential effects and therefore different potential solutions. Tonight's forum will focus on the cities of San Mateo, Foster City, Belmont, San Carlos, and Redwood Shores. We hope to spur our neighbors to engage deeply in the topic and offer their thoughts on how we can best prepare ourselves. So with that, I'm delighted to hand the mic over to San Mateo City Council member Diane Papan for her comments. Diane.
Thank you so much, Marie, and thank you to the League for your efforts to help get out the word about the important work that's being done by the Flood and Sea Level Rise Resiliency District, or FSLR as we like to call it. As an elected official, planning and building infrastructure is really some of the most challenging, impactful, and long-lasting work we do. I think infrastructure is as meaningful to our personal safety as police and fire. It's also complex and it's expensive. In my own city, the city of San Mateo, I saw this firsthand. We had to create 2 separate assessment districts, and the homes that are in those districts are paying for the construction of levees in order to get out of the flood zone and in order to be relieved from having to pay for expensive annual flood insurance. The countywide FSLR district was established in January of 2020 for 2 major reasons. First and foremost, water knows no boundaries. As San Mateo County has the distinction of being the most vulnerable county in the entire state of California when it comes to the perils of sea level rise, it seemed only fitting, if not imperative, that we create a district. Second, it's all about money. Most of the work required to protect against sea level rise is hugely expensive. It was clear that we needed to unite to qualify for funding from multiple sources. A city-by-city approach was not going to allow us to effectively compete, especially for federal money that usually favors distributing dollars that will help not just one community, but several communities. The governance of the district includes elected leaders from throughout San Mateo County. The board members are from regions. So we have the North, Central, South, the Coast, an at-large seat, and 2 members from the Board of Supervisors, for a total of 7 board members. And I'm pleased to represent the central part of our county. The projects that the new district is working on all involve multiple jurisdictions within the county, and that they run along the bay shoreline, the Pacific coastline, or our watersheds. And they represent some of the most pressing water-related climate threats that this county faces. Tonight, you will hear about some of the projects that are going on in the central region of FSLR. And as you hear about this work, I hope that you will see the importance of the 2 major reasons for creating the district. Water knows no boundaries, and it will take lots of dollars to protect ourselves. So without further ado, it's my distinct honor to turn the program over to FSLR's Executive Director, Mr. Len Materman.
All right, thank you so much, Diane. And thank you everybody for joining us today. I'm glad to be able to discuss the district, our work in general terms, and then zero in on a couple places and then turn it over to some of our colleagues in San Mateo and Foster City to continue the conversation, and then we'll answer questions. So first off, I'm going to share a screen and begin a short presentation. So hopefully you all can see the screen okay right now. So here we are in the really the second in the series, but the first that focuses on a specific geographic area. And as was mentioned, San Mateo, Foster City, Redwood Shores, Belmont, and San Carlos is what we're looking at today. So first, a bit about the district and the county. The county, as was mentioned, has tremendous vulnerability. In fact, it's kind of the poster child for sea level rise vulnerability in California, and in fact, the whole West Coast. It's the most vulnerable county in the state to the first 3 feet of sea level rise in terms of many significant factors: population, including underrepresented population, property value, number of homes, and number of contaminated sites. And in fact, it's only one of 6 counties in the country, and the only one on the West Coast that has this vulnerability for over 100,000 people during the first 3 feet of sea level rise. Of course, we have many other assets that are vulnerable, including schools, hospitals, beaches, highways, water treatment plants, etc. So there was a great need recognized within the last several years for this county to work together and address this issue. So the county has historically had an agency that looks at flooding. And so the first question was, is that agency able to address the issue that we now find ourselves in with climate change? And it was not. It was determined that both for geographic and programmatic reasons, that the former flood control district was not able to address kind of the transformative challenge that we have. It only really focused on 10% of the county and 10% of the bay shoreline and none of the coast side, which of course has major issues regarding erosion that will be made worse. So we also realized, as was mentioned, that cities, a city-by-city approach to this problem cannot solve the issue, and a regional approach, both for funding as well as in terms of technical expertise and land rights and permits, needed to be pursued. So the district began in January of last year. I won't go over again. Our board of directors includes county supervisors and city council members. All 20 cities, as well as the county itself, have committed to its startup's operational funding. OneShoreline, which is what the district is also known as, and our website is oneshoreline.org, takes a holistic view at 3 key issues: the threat by incorporated sea level rise, and our objective for projects is a sea level that's protection against a sea level that's 10 feet above today's high tide. A holistic view of the objectives, not just looking at the threats, but also looking to turn our shoreline and waterways from liabilities into assets that are integrated into the community and valued by the community, and utilizing green infrastructure is an important part of that. And then finally, a holistic view of the geography to achieve these objectives by working with multiple cities at the same time to do regional planning. So this is a snapshot of the county. Highway 101 runs along the bay here. You see the symbol for Highway 101. The bay is on the right and the Pacific Ocean on the left. These are some of the major projects that we're working on just in our first year. Some of them are at various stages of planning, design, and in fact, one of them is going to be starting construction down by the intersection of Menlo Park and Redwood City, starting construction later this month. But the other ones are in planning and design. And of course, for this meeting today, we're going to focus in on this part of the county and the cities that were mentioned previously, and this part of the shoreline, as well as the water that comes to the bay from the hills. The current FEMA map in this area, and the FEMA maps are based on what they model as a 100-year event. And FEMA maps are important because it delineates where flood insurance is required if a property owner holds a federally backed mortgage. So FEMA maps are important. They also show the areas of higher risk. So the current FEMA map for this area, and you see again Highway 101 cutting through the image. The areas in blue-green represent the areas in the 100-year floodplain. The areas in light brown represent the 500-year floodplain, so they're not required to pay flood insurance. And we'll talk about these striped areas in just a second. But these are areas that will be in the FEMA floodplain if levees are not constructed. So this image shows Foster City here and Redwood Shores here. Highway 101 cuts across the bottom of the screen, and Highway 92 goes through the screen towards Hayward up top. And so this is what the area looks like in terms of the map. And this is what it looks like on the FEMA map. And so all of the areas that are striped will be put into the FEMA flood zone if levees are not constructed. And I'm sure many of you are well aware that Foster City has engaged in a very large project to protect Foster City and to prevent the FEMA maps being redrawn to include Foster City. And we are now engaged at the very earliest stages on a project to deal with this issue in Redwood Shores. And later, shortly, we're going to hear from the Foster City project manager to talk about that project for a few minutes. So here's Redwood Shores. In 2020, FEMA notified the cities that the levees must be raised and data gaps must be closed to remain outside of the FEMA flood maps. But raising those levees only to satisfy FEMA is a very short-term fix. It really solves the problem for the FEMA insurance issue just until the next time the maps are redrawn. And it also certainly does nothing for sea level rise. So to deal with that in the long term, which is the objective for our agency, OneShoreline, against sea level rise, our objective is 6 feet above the FEMA 100-year flood elevation. And that's what we're going to be aiming to design these new levees to. By the end of this month, Redwood City, along with OneShoreline and our partners, are going to be applying for the first grant to begin this effort. The map on the right shows Redwood Shores here. The area in yellow is in San Carlos's jurisdiction. The area in purple is in Belmont's jurisdiction. Redwood City is all here. And this is county land, which is called the Harbor Industrial Area. There are assets, important assets in Redwood Shores, including the county airport and San Carlos Airport, and also Samtrans has a regional facility. So these are the agencies that would be partners on this project with us. Another project that we're involved with at OneShoreline involves the Belmont Creek watershed. This is the area of the watershed. Belmont Creek is the blue line that runs through it. Of course, it's in the city of Belmont, as well as San Carlos includes the watershed. And here's a FEMA flood map near the Harbor Industrial Area on the bottom right. Twin Pines Park is in this image here, and then as it flows towards Redwood Shores in the bay. And Harbor Industrial Area does see flooding. And so in 2019, the county, along with the cities of San Carlos and Belmont, completed a Belmont Creek watershed management plan to look at what can be done to address the flooding issue in the downstream areas towards Highway 101, but also address ecosystem and erosion issues farther upstream. The first project of that is working in Twin Pines Park. This image in Twin Pines Park shows how lovely it is, but it also shows that it's eroding. Here you see exposed roots, as well as up here higher on the bank. And in those areas, you can see that the creek is eroding, that land in Twin Pines Park is being lost, and we need to do naturally treatments to reduce the erosion and further deterioration of the creek there. This will also improve water quality downstream and have some small effect on the flooding issue. So there's a project that's beginning. It's really two adjacent projects. One is to do creek restoration throughout Twin Pines Park. That's what the blue dashed line represents. And then also build under the parking lots at Twin Pines Park a stormwater basin that will collect stormwater when there are high flows in the creek. And it will drain into the basin through this orange dash line into these blue shaded areas, and it will be filtered down into the groundwater, and then excess water will re-enter the creek farther downstream, and it will be done so in a way that reduces the likelihood of flooding downstream as well. So that's the Belmont Creek watershed. I also want to briefly mention a project funded by the state that OneShoreline is leading to install stream gauges in streams throughout the county. The one related to this area is on San Mateo Creek. And so what we do is we monitor the flow in the creek and are able to give a bit of advance warning to communities downstream about when we expect overtopping to occur. In 2020, gauges were installed in San Mateo Creek, as well as Colma Creek, San Bruno Creek, and the Atherton Channel, which are all flood-prone creeks in our county. And then in 2021, we'll be initiating in other areas of the county emergency action plans with the state grant. So here we are on April 8th. This is the event tonight. We have another event on April 29th that's focused on areas south of here. And that includes southern part of Redwood City, let's say south of Seaport Boulevard, and then Menlo Park in East Palo Alto. In June, we'll be focusing on wildfire countywide with our partners from the fire side of activity in the county. And then back in September, we'll turn back to water and look at the North County along the bay, and then the coast side in October. So I'm going to turn it over now for more details on the efforts by the cities of San Mateo and Foster City to protect against flooding and sea level rise. And I'd like to ask Azalea Mitch, who's the Public Works Director for the city of San Mateo, to take it from here on their projects. Azalea?
Great. Good evening. Thank you, Len. First, I'd like to thank the League of Women Voters, OneShoreline, for hosting this forum. And as always, thank you to Diane Papan, who's been engaged in this effort for quite a long time. So with that, I will, let's see, share my screen. All right. Well, thank you very much. To start off, a little bit about San Mateo. We have a population of over 100,000 people, representing a diverse community and 13% of the county's population. We are centrally located, very easy for us to hop on 101 and 92. And we have a large operating budget, around $200 million, as well as a pretty healthy capital improvement budget of 53 this year. As with any city, we have many key assets. Our main mission is to provide a high quality of life for the city's residents. So we maintain and operate a big wastewater treatment plant with Foster City, many pump stations, sewer lines, streets, libraries, and parking garages. So the Public Works Department is very busy. Now we have a big challenge. As you all know, carbon dioxide has been building up. As of this year, I believe the CO2 levels have been the highest they have been on record, and we are continuing to see warming temperatures and rising seas. While we think about rising sea levels, a new challenge are the impacts to groundwater. So something that we have to consider as part of cities along the shoreline are the impacts of saltwater intrusion as well, not just rising bay water. In 2018, the state gave us the most updated guidance based on scientific findings. So we know that the levels will continue to rise, and the likely scenario, if our greenhouse gas emissions continue to rise as they have been, is expected to be around 3.4 feet. There are worst case scenarios, but the science is continuing to evolve. Now, what does that mean to our cities? Well, we are certainly starting to see the impacts of inundation, which is permanent, as well as the impacts of exacerbated flooding. And that's the wet weather flooding that we see when we experience storms. So we have learned here in San Mateo that our strategy needs to be multifaceted. It needs to be regional in nature, as Diane noted, and that it needs to be subject to reassessment as the science continues to evolve. Now, we are pretty fortunate in San Mateo to have an extensive levee system that expands for over 3 miles. We do have varying elevations, so each of the segments aren't quite aligned, they vary. And we do have 2 segments that do not have FEMA accreditation. So as Len noted, FEMA accreditation, what does that mean? When a levee is certified and accredited, it means that it is engineered to provide the protection from the 100-year flood. And that sets the base elevation. And associated with that, however, are also freeboard requirements. So at the elevation above that flood to the top of the levee is the freeboard. And what we are continuing to assess is not only as the FEMA maps will continue to change, that protection, that the levee system does provide us protection not only from flooding, but from sea level rise as we continue to maintain that freeboard. And I understand what Len said, that it is not focused on sea level rise, but it will be really important for us to continue to reassess the elevation of our levees as we continue to see sea level rise. So what have we done? So as some of you know, the city of San Mateo embarked on a 10-year program to rehabilitate the wastewater system. So part of this $1 billion effort involves expanding our critical facility, and that is the wastewater treatment plant. So what we decided to do during the design phase, we realized that while this facility is protected by the levee system, that we needed a secondary level of protection. So we decided to take the 100-year flood, the base flood, and to look at the likely risk scenario under the high emissions. And we were able to incorporate, in addition to the 7.5 feet of the base flood elevation, we incorporated the 3.4 feet associated with that 66% likely range for year 2100. So we designed our facility to be at that elevation for the design floor. So that means that if we have a problem with our levee system, our critical features of the treatment plant will be protected. And that means the electrical systems will be above that scenario. Our second project, we've been busy this year, is this North Shore View Flood Improvement Project. So this is an area in our city that is subject to the special flood hazard area, which means it's vulnerable to the 100-year flood. We do have deficient levee segments that are not FEMA accredited. So last year we started improving those segments as well as upgrading 2 of our stormwater pump stations. This is a $24 million effort. It is funded through an assessment district, and by the end of next year or the following year, once this project is completed, those homes, 1,600 homes, will be able to have the protection and not be subject to flood insurance requirements. So as Diane Papan noted, water has no boundaries, and these maps were developed as part of the sea level rise vulnerability assessment that the county undertook a few years ago. And you can map out the different scenarios. In San Mateo, as you can see, the areas in light blue and deep blue are the areas that are currently vulnerable, and that is where we're doing our current improvements. However, you will hear from Foster City in terms of their improvements that we really are one region, and we need to continue to collaborate so that this interconnected network is maintained and so that it addresses sea level rise challenges. So what is our strategy in San Mateo? We know that while our primary form of protection is our levee system, we know that we will begin to see the impacts of rising groundwater. As we evaluate our critical facilities, we will need to incorporate design features that add protection. We have currently embarked on an update of our general plan, and we will need to consider adaptation strategies as we update that document. We also know that energy efficiency is critical so that we tackle the greenhouse gas emission challenge. So we're in the process of evaluating how we can convert our fleet to be green. And then at the wastewater treatment plant, we do have an opportunity to assess our energy recovery. We do generate methane. It is an energy source. And so we do have an opportunity to convert that into electrical energy. And all in all, I think that our approach is this needs to be a regional effort. We need to continue to reassess the science and to see how the levels will will increase over time. And the challenge, of course, will be for us to continue to reassess, to plan our projects, and to find the funding so that our community can remain protected. And with that, I will pass it on to Foster City.
Thank you, Azalea. Again, my name is Paul Nagengast. I'm the project manager for the Foster City Levee Improvements Projects. What I'm going to share is an actual project that we've talked about, and I've heard some conversations of the need to plan. And what I will share with you, and those of you that do use the Bay Trail, and perhaps you do have used portions in Foster City, the third phase of 3 phases finally closed the trail. So there are approximately 6.5 miles of Bay Trail closed, and that reflects where the levee is going to be is being raised. I've heard one of our design engineers say, in order to raise a levee, you have to raise a levee. And with that, it is it's simple in some ways, but complicated in a lot of, when you're in a large area, over 6 miles, you affect literally every member of the community. And so I will go with the slide, and I'm going to go over just the overview of the slides I'm going to present. Will be a background, a little bit of description of the project, some of the impacts, whether it's the project or the community, why it does matter. And then there's always, I'm going to share with you various the websites that you can go to Foster City about the levee project. There's questions and answers you can ask anytime. There's a quick turnaround on any questions asked. We have public forum opportunities. We have another one coming April 21st. You could hear about the levee project. And every week on Thursday, we have Levee Live, where you can call in and ask your own question. Talk to a person about the project. So if I go a brief background. So we've talked about, I've heard about the FEMA maps. And in Foster City's case, in 2014, FEMA advised the city that unless something was done with the levees, the community would be placed in a flood zone. Flood insurance is expensive. I've heard conversations about having to have flood insurance. That can be $2,000 to $3,000 a year. So that's not something that communities take lightly. It affects, the financial consequences are high. So the city wanted to verify that FEMA was correct. In 2015, that's when analysis was done to determine, yep, FEMA is correct. We need to do something. And that's when it was decided to do a planning study to determine what type of levees or how high should the levees be constructed. And following then in 2016 is when the EIR was drafted. It was for review. Through that was a combination of sheet pile, which some of you, if you've gone through Foster City, you'll see pieces of metal sticking out of the ground. Literally, that's the sheet pile. That's part of a sheet pile wall. There will also be reinforced concrete walls and earthen fill walls as part of the types of levee material around Foster City. We've heard about paying for something of this size. Foster City decided on its own to pass a measure, and it's Measure P, and it authorized $9 million worth of bond sales. And it was pretty amazing, 81% approval. I mean, you don't hear much of the communities approving to tax themselves, let alone at 81% approval. So once it was decided that funds would be available, the permitting process, the final plans and specifications were worked out. There were, I believe, 7 different permitting agencies. The major one is the BCDC, or the Bay Conservation and Development Commission. And that's a very extensive permit to do the project, especially since you're closing the Bay Trail, the wonderful amenity that obviously for 3 years, it's going to be affected by Foster City's project. So the project was advertised and awarded in 2020, which, oh, by the way, we had a pandemic occurring during then too. So good news, bad news, right? The bids came in really well. It was $60 million project. Project started in October of 2020. Where the contractor is today, they've just finished the final closure of the trail, and that's from the San Mateo Bridge to just west of Mariners Point to Anchor Road there at San Mateo, City of San Mateo boundary. And what I wanted to reiterate that it's a project, and it's a 3-year project. And knowing that there are various restrictions within that, not just in case you have a major event, say an El Nino event or something that might affect during the wintertime, there's also environmental considerations. Foster City has nesting rails that has to work in between certain months where the contractor literally cannot work while environmentalist is conducting surveys to determine the nesting habitat. We know schools have been closed the past year, but a lot of them are going to start opening this spring. April 19th, a school's right adjacent to the project is opening, and we know next fall schools will be in session. The community is starting to be more active. We also know the vaccinations occurring, more of the public's going to be out moving about, intermingling. So it's just a lot of things that weren't considered early on, but we're realizing as the project goes on, and especially a project this size, that we have to consider. And above all, you're staying on time and try to be within your budget, and you try to minimize those impacts to the community. And Foster City prides itself as the first peninsula Bayshore city to directly address the climate change and sea level rise. Hopefully, Foster City can be an inspiration to other communities. And we talked about the FEMA flood elevations, and what Foster City's project is showing that it meets, and granted, studies were going to change. A major ice shelf melts can change everything, but projected this project meets 2050. It's 99% meeting the 2050 sea level rise, and pretty confident it'll meet 2100. But again, obviously that's a moving dynamic with what's happening overall with the climate. Just want to share some impacts. We're all talking about, oh yeah, let's go raise the levee. It's a lot that you have to be aware of, and the community needs to be aware for it. I can just tell you with the community in Foster City, we're addressing the various traffic delays, noise and dust from the project itself. Again, it's 6.5 miles of project, and one of the biggest concerns has been the interruption of some of the recreational uses because of the COVID. What's the one thing you could do during the pandemic was go walk outside. Well, what happens when we do a levee project and raise a levee? You have to close the trail. So it's been an interesting process to work with the community to share some of the other parks that you have available to use, to explain to the community, go out and walk out other neighborhoods. So you'll find it takes the whole community to do a project of this size. It's not just the city staff or the contractor to build this project, but it takes everyone to complete a project of something of this magnitude. And I've mentioned some phases, and those are the levee trail closures. Again, to those of you that have used the trail, you know it's been, portions of it started closing in October 2020. And I've just advised the final piece of the phase 3 was just closed beginning of April. Good news, contractor's a month ahead. So if you notice in the slide, it said May 2021, the contractor's ahead of schedule. So it actually was April of 2021. And the important thing too, and BCDC realized this is, you know, when you do a project, you're impacting the Bay Trail, a wonderful resource and amenity in the community. And BCDC was very clear, you know, instead of trying to piecemeal it, you know, referred to as ripping the whole Band-Aid off, close the whole thing down, work everything at once, and minimize the amount of time that the trail is out as much as you can, but realizing if you tried to piecemeal it, it would take you twice as long and cost longer. So it's a balance. I'm not going to tell you, you know, anything's right or anything's wrong, but you'll learn it's a balance how to you know, work with, you know, having an amenity open, but at the same time making sure your project is successful and financially feasible. Because you know, as we say, we can do anything, but there's always a cost associated with that. Again, why this project matters so much, and you can see a little bit in the background. There's a rendering what the new levee is going to look like. It's the sheet piles I've been referring to. You see the concrete cap. It's in some areas it can be 7 feet higher than the existing levee, for those of you familiar with the area. In other areas, it's only a couple of feet higher. Again, it all depends what the existing elevation is and how much higher the trail needed to go. The levee is also more resistant to any earthquake. As we know, Foster City is built on fill, and anything to reduce liquefaction or reduce possibility of something being damaged by liquefaction during an earthquake, which the sheet piles are intended to stay in place. And I should note the new trail that's going in, the existing one now could be very competitive between bicycles, runners, pedestrians. The new trail that's going in as part of the BCDC permit will be 18 feet wide. So you have 12 foot of a paved asphalt concrete surface, and you will also have decomposed granite or that DG rock compacted on 4 feet on the, there's 4 feet on the bay side and then 2 feet on the landward side. So you have a total of 18 feet of trail width on the new improved Bay Trail. And just there's some some things to go to, or some web pages or emails. Anybody's welcome to check into Foster City, see what's happening, how the project's coming along. It's constantly being updated with new pictures. We have a timeline on there. We've had, again, several community forums to advise not only Foster City, but any interested individuals can check in, see what's going on. You can ask questions. If you have questions, whether technical or general, or just when will the trail open, you can either find under existing questions and answers, or perhaps you can find them under, you can ask a new question and you will be responded fairly quickly on that. So I wanted to, again, thank you for the opportunity to share what Foster City is experiencing. I hear a lot about the planning that's going on now. Well, Foster City went and decided to embark upon it. I'm sure there are a lot of the residents can tell you how they feel about it, and I'm sure elected officials will sharing their experiences, and any of the technical individuals that have been involved in the project. Concludes what I was going to share, and I'd be happy, I think, turn it over to Diane.
I think Diane had to jump off to another call.
Okay, that's those elected officials, right?
She's a busy woman. I'm Margie Gator from the League of Women Voters, and I'm the moderator for the for this event. And I'm going to ask the questions. And Azalea, I think we'll start with you. I have a question. Are we really designing for sea level rise of only 3.4 feet by 2100? Recent models suggest more like 10 to 20 feet rise by 2100 due to climate accelerators already baked in. Are we misdesigning here? Yikes, the questioner says. And also someone else asked, can you explain the freeboard again, please?
Oh, sure, absolutely. So if we look at today, right now, it's not raining. We don't have a storm. We live in San Mateo. There's a levee system. So that that water level is at, mean sea level. So it's rather low. If we were to get the 100-year event, that level would increase in San Mateo by around 7 feet. So that is your elevation, your base flood elevation is 7 feet above mean sea level. So what we did for our wastewater treatment project, we said, let's take, even though it's protected by the levee system, let's look at the 7 feet and then add the 2100 likely scenario of 3.4 feet. So we're looking at almost 11 feet of protection. So, and yes, this is an evolving science. Our project took many years to design, and we actually updated the elevations when the 2018 guidance came out. And that is our biggest challenge. What can we design, what can we build, and what can we fund? Hence our need to reassess as time goes by.
Thank you. And again, explain what freeboard is.
The freeboard is the distance between the elevation at the 100-year flood and the top of the levee.
Great, thank you. This is not for anybody specifically, so whoever wants to jump in, please feel free. This question is, can the flood control infrastructure help during drought situations? Anybody have a comment on that?
I would say certain types of flood control infrastructure can. If we build, one of the projects that I mentioned is what's called a regional stormwater basin that's underground in Belmont Creek. And that's an example of flood control infrastructure that also has water quality benefits. And it also has benefits to our groundwater table. So I think that there are options for that. But in terms of protecting against, let's say, the 100-year storm that Azalea mentioned, or protecting against a sea level that's several feet above we have today, those types of infrastructure, I think, would be more substantial than what could provide these alternative benefits.
Great, thank you. Anybody else to chip in on that one? Okay. Here's another question. Along with sea level rise, has any assessment been done towards ground level rise or sinking, i.e. stability over future time? Earthquake shaking, for example, can cause coastal fill areas to sink, which would impact levee height. So has any assessment been done towards ground level rise, sinking, stability over future with respect to earthquake, etc.?
So I can say that we were very happy to see that the County of San Mateo did receive grant funding, and they're working with the San Francisco Estuary Institute to assess shallow groundwater effects. So I know that we're anxiously waiting for that study.
Great, thank you. Another question is peninsula cities are updating their housing requirements. Many peninsula cities will have to plan for significant new housing in sea level rise impacted areas. How can cities address potential flooding impacts of locating new housing in areas inundated by sea level rise in their general plans safety elements, and other resiliency planning documents. So they can demonstrate new housing won't be impacted by sea level rise flooding. Can you discuss the specific policy language that cities can consider putting into their safety elements? Kind of a long question. I'll read it again. The Peninsula cities are updating housing elements to plan for housing, and many of the cities have to plan for significant new housing in sea level rise impacted areas. How can the cities address potential flooding impacts of locating new housing in areas inundated by sea level rise in their general plan safety elements and other resiliency planning documents, so that they can demonstrate new housing won't be impacted by sea level rise flooding?
Well, what I would say is that the planning, design, and implementation of sea level rise at the earliest possible stages in regards to shoreline development, whether it's housing or otherwise, or private, commercial, and whatnot, it's better to incorporate sea level rise at the earliest possible stage, because that maintains the options that you have to incorporate the development, housing and otherwise, into the flood protection infrastructure. So in addition to maintaining options, it also reduces costs, because then you don't have to go in later and put in infrastructure around a new development, let's say, that otherwise is ill prepared for that new infrastructure. So there are things that the general plans can include to incorporate sea level rise. They need to, and we're working with a couple cities that are developing either the general plan update or a section of their city to be updated, to include kind of a broader look at specific areas of the cities, and to incorporate sea level rise into those areas, so that we don't get into a situation where one-off developments come before the city for a request for a permit or application for development, and that they haven't taken into account anything but the footprint of their building, because that is a recipe for having the city having to come in much later and address the water issues that should have been addressed at this stage. So there is a lot that the city can do. And a good example of this is north of this area of the county that we're talking about today. But one of the 7 main areas of focus of the general plan update for South San Francisco is sea level rise. And there are 2 other areas of focus that overlap with our work. And so there definitely is room for the general plan the general plan update in all cities to include this kind of activity.
Great, thank you. Another question, Paul raised the issue of evolving science and the possibility of additional major ice shelves melting, as is surprisingly being evidenced. Given the levee associated problem of groundwater rise and rising risks with rising levee elevations, as we saw in New Orleans, what is the practical economic height limit for bayshore levees? And what is the range of years of protection that it might bring?
I'd be glad to start. As I said, for us, the objective is 6 feet above the current 100-year, which is equal to, generally speaking, it's equal to 10 feet above today's high tide. So that's the objective that the district is pursuing on its levees, 10 feet above today's daily high tide. In terms of what year we'll see that, I don't think that really matters. I mean, I think a focus, and people talk about it all the time. And so, we hear it all the time, but does it really matter if it's 2040 or 2060? The issue is the water. People are concerned about getting flooded. They're not concerned about the exact date that's going to happen. They just don't want it to happen. And so our focus is, what is the water elevation? And we're also focused on reducing the uncertainty. And so if you build higher, you reduce uncertainty and worry about what's going to happen, 10 years from now, if sea level rise projections don't pan out to what the state guidance is or anybody else's guidance. So we pick a pretty aggressive number, 10 feet above today's high tide, and that's the objective that we're pursuing for the projects we're involved with.
Thank you. Paul, this question is for you. When finished, will the Foster City levee be of uniform height along its full 6.5 mile length, or will it vary based on storm surge considerations?
Thank you. I can't tell you the exact. I didn't go through the design review exactly, but I can tell you if you're closer or near wave action, like say right under the San Mateo Bridge, you're right next to the bay. There will be some higher walls involved there, and also due to some of the surrounding infrastructure related to Caltrans facilities and bridge, as opposed to closer to Highway 101, where some of the levees only really being raised 2 feet from the existing. I don't know the exact elevations, if it's the same elevation throughout the whole 6 miles, but I know there is more wave action. And I think that the person that asked the question is exactly right. The closer you are to the bay itself, because I've seen pictures of the bay coming over on East 3rd Avenue during some major wind and storm events. So he can ask the questions through our levee project. If we want an exact number, I can, we can get back to him on the height. But in general, the closer you are to the bay due to the wave action, you have more considerations than if you were set back, several hundreds of yards away from the bay, which in some locations that is the case. But again, if you want exact numbers, you'll have to come to our website, ask that question. We can provide, whether you're north or south of Foster City, what those elevation heights will be.
Great, thank you. Here's another question. San Mateo County has multiple parks and downtown renovation projects in various planning and design stations. For example, Central Park in San Mateo, Flood Park in Menlo Park, Redwood City downtown parking, Martin Luther King Park, Junior Park in East Palo Alto. All opportunities to incorporate regional flood and stormwater treatment projects. How much influence does the regional district have on incorporating flood and stormwater on these local projects?
Well, I would say a lot of these local projects are city projects, and so there is an effort to move towards regional stormwater projects to satisfy the city requirements to address the water quality of stormwater. And the idea is by grouping efforts into regional projects, like perhaps some of what was mentioned in the question, and there are others, by grouping them into regional projects, then multiple cities can get the benefits of the stormwater, the capture of stormwater for flood protection, but also for the water quality benefits. And there are expensive requirements to do that that are getting more expensive. And so I think there is an opportunity for some of that. And our district, the regional stormwater effort is not kind of a focus at the moment, although we are working with others in the county, including some of the cities, on their projects.
And if I could add to that, so the municipalities in San Mateo County, so we do operate under one regional stormwater permit. So there is definitely the interest there to collaborate and look at regional stormwater capture and treatment to address the stormwater quality issue. And it's definitely a more cost-effective way to meet our requirements.
Great, thank you. Another question, can someone address the groundwater impacts of sea level rise on infrastructure? Levees may keep out surface water, but will parking garages flood or utilities sit in saline groundwater, even though communities may have improved the levees?
Absolutely, that is a concern, and so that it will be part of our assessment. We do have stormwater pump stations, but it is one of those other challenges that we will begin to see rising groundwater, and it will impact our critical facilities and structures. So to be assessed.
Thank you. Paul mentioned Foster City was the first Bayshore city to address sea level rise with a levee project. I thought San Mateo had recently increased levee heights, and Azalea mentioned ongoing work in the north. But does San Mateo have another Foster City sized project ahead? And how about Burlingame?
So in San Mateo, no, we do not have another project. We started construction on our levee segments last year, and that project will be completed in the following year. But we will continue to reassess, given that maintaining FEMA accreditation, it will be critical for the city.
I can mention, thank you, Azalea. I can mention something about Burlingame and other cities. So first of all, the first 1.5 miles of shoreline around East Palo Alto, it was a levee was built, completed in 2018, and that levee is to that same standard I mentioned before, 10 feet above today's high tide. It's not the completion of East Palo Alto. There's another project that's now in planning and design to extend beyond that first 1.5 miles. At the county line for East Palo Alto, a levee of that same height. So I would say about half of East Palo Alto's levee the construction was completed 3 years ago, and the other half is continuing in design right now. In terms of Burlingame, we do have a project with the city of Burlingame and the city of Millbrae just to the north, and it will align and connect the levee along the Burlingame shoreline to Millbrae's, and then to San Francisco Airport, just to the north of there. San Francisco Airport has a very large project on its shoreline, and then of course Burlingame connects to San Mateo at the southern end of that city. And so we'll be working as we develop the planning and design for Burlingame's shoreline with that city. We'll be working with San Mateo so that these projects are aligned and connected as well.
Thank you. How important is it for wealthy, educated, at-risk county like ours to demonstrate reducing greenhouse gas emissions as an inspiration to regional communities and communities worldwide to reduce theirs as a mechanism, and this as a mechanism to extend the useful life of levees? So how important is it for a county like ours to demonstrate reduction of greenhouse gases as inspiration for other communities to do the same, to help extend the life of the levees?
Well, I mean, all I can say on that, the dealing with climate change can really be thought of as offensive defense, right? And reducing greenhouse gases is, you could think of it as the offense, and building levees to protect against sea level rise is kind of the defense. On the defensive side is what we're working on and what I'm most familiar with. San Mateo County is a leader, and there is a role for counties like ours to be leaders. Our agency is the first countywide agency west of the Mississippi to address the water effects of climate change specifically. And so we're excited and proud about that leadership role the county has taken. In terms of the county's leadership role on greenhouse gases, that's not something that I think, I don't know, maybe Azalea or Paul have thoughts on that, but that's not something that I'm qualified to talk about, really.
Sure. I mean, I can say that we have our climate action plan. As I noted in our presentation, we are working toward transitioning from fossil fuels for our fleet to a green option. We are looking at potential opportunities to reduce or generate electricity at the wastewater plant. So our approach is definitely multifaceted. As planners, we put a lot of focus on development around transit-oriented zones, so that people have the opportunity to walk, to take the train, to bicycle. We just adopted 2 years ago a bicycle master plan, so that we're trying to really connect the city so that people feel less stressed while biking, and so that we get more people to choose greener alternatives. So this is a very much a multifaceted approach. It touches upon urban planning, how we operate and maintain our critical facilities, and what vision our council sets. But it is a priority for us, and we're looking at both how, like Len said, how to invest so that our defense is good, but at the same time, what can we do now to make the lives of our residents, to have that quality of life improved, and so they can have better opportunities to have a smaller footprint.
Thank you. Another question is, what about Redwood City, Redwood Shores, and San Carlos? Is the whole coastline going to be ready for at least 10-foot higher water, including levees, key infrastructures, and creeks? This is a resident of San Carlos who's wondering if he should move to San Mateo or Foster City.
Well, I don't think we're housing consultants or real estate agents, but having said that, no, I don't think so. I don't think people in San Carlos need to be worried about that. The Redwood Shores project covers most of San Carlos's shoreline, but there is a section to the south of Redwood Shores that is also north of approximately Maple Street on the east side of Highway 101. There is a section there that's not developed along the highway. That is San Carlos Bay shoreline. So the Redwood Shores project covers Redwood City, and it covers San Carlos, as I mentioned. It covers parts of Belmont. And then Redwood City extends south of there, though. The area that I just mentioned, Maple Street, Seaport Boulevard, and then south to approximately Marsh Road is Redwood City Bay shoreline. And there are other efforts that Redwood City is undertaking with our district to look at, what can be done there to address the vulnerabilities that they currently have, and how do we plan for new restoration in that area and new development in that area, such that it is aligned and connected to efforts to the north at Redwood Shores and to the south in Menlo Park. So there's a lot of planning going on around that. And I just wanted to say, in Menlo Park and Redwood City, we are starting construction. I mentioned that briefly earlier on a project that reduces flooding along the shoreline to the 5 mobile home parks that are in Redwood City between Marsh Road and Woodside Road.
Right, and we're having another event to discuss the South Bay, South San Mateo coast. So on June 3rd, so we'll be able to tune into that to hear more details.
April 29th.
April 29th. Oh, yes, sorry. Thank you. Will any work be done on the lagoon that winds through San Mateo and Foster City by the Hillsdale overpass?
Yes, our Marina Lagoon. Well, if you are free May 19th, we will be having a study session with our council to present the stormwater funding analysis. And part of that is driven by the costs associated in dredging the lagoon. So a lot to think about, but yes, we'll be presenting the funding options to our council on May 19th.
Great, thank you. As various levees around the bay are improved for sea level rise predictions, what does that do to the flood levels for communities, areas that haven't improved their levees yet? Is there a regional cumulative impact from improving levees on the flood heights in unprotected communities?
Well, that could be. It's a pretty small impact, and that impact gets smaller as you go farther out from the developed levees, the increased height levees. And certainly the California Environmental Quality Act requires projects to evaluate their impacts on adjacent areas, and that would include the impact of increasing the height of a levee in terms of what that would do to sending water or increasing the water height in other areas. So I would say that would be evaluated by all of these major projects. It's not something that that certainly should keep these projects from moving forward.
Great, thank you. And I only have a couple of other questions in the Q&A, so if the audience has more, please throw them up in the Q&A. Thank you.
Margie, could I correct myself? It's May 17th. I just realized for our council meeting for the Marina Lagoon. Sorry, it was April 19th. That's our next meeting, but May 17th. Thank you.
Great. Which county east of the Mississippi has a sea level rise district? I thought OneShoreline was the only SLR flood control district in the USA. Thanks.
Well, so there are, I don't have a full record of all the shoreline counties east of the Mississippi and what they're doing, but I can say that in Louisiana, there are parishes that since Katrina have developed countywide or parish-wide programs that look at climate change resilience issues. I can't say that they're, what their model is relative to ours. And also, as people may have read, there's a lot of activity going on a regional scale in Miami, Dade County, Florida, and the counties to the north of there to address their vulnerabilities. And then, New York and New Jersey, so there are several counties there that have programs specific to sea level rise and climate change. But in terms of county governance, what we can say with confidence is west of the Mississippi, we're the first. That's all.
Excellent. Well, I think we would all like to say we want more. Be a good thing.
Yes, that would be.
Definitely. Early on, Len, you mentioned things that were impacted by sea level rise included contaminated sites. What contaminated sites are in harm's way in our area?
Well, there are actually many, and maybe we could provide. So the San Mateo County completed in 2018 what it called a vulnerability assessment for sea level rise, and it identified contaminated sites as well as all kinds of valuable sites, hospitals and schools and the other things that I mentioned. And so an inventory of that is included in that document. And I'm going to, there's a couple of our staff that are on this call, maybe they could, or on this meeting, maybe they could add a link to that in the chat if folks are interested. They can take a look at that report.
Chat, maybe they can text it to you. The chat is disabled for the attendees.
Got it. Okay.
So we're doing this Q&A, or they could put it in the Q&A and then I can put it out there.
Okay, super. Thank you.
Thank you. And the last question I have is, beyond just building levees at an engineered design height, are there design elements incorporated to take opportunistic advantages to enhance recreation, water activity on creeks, drought tolerant parks with LED lights, green infrastructure, and other social elements that would improve community access and use? And do you have specific examples?
I do, but I'll first let Paul and Azalea if they want to say anything, and then I'll add. No.
So,
oh, yeah. Go ahead.
I can say that in San Mateo, right now we have not considered other elements with our levee improvements.
And I know Foster City has their hands full with the levee project, so I don't have anything to share with Foster City.
So what I was going to add is not so much on the recreational piece, although as Paul said, these levees are great vehicles for recreation, and I think Foster City's levees are going to be a great enhancement with their wide levee tops in terms of people moving about and utilizing the Bay Trail. What I was going to say though is on the other side of it, levees can be part of the ecosystem benefits that we have along the shoreline. And previously, I was involved in the construction of a levee that had on its bayside slope a very gradual slope, and it's called a horizontal levee or an ecotone levee, where you build different habitat zones on an extremely gradual slope. And that, in fact, is better for the species. As the seas rise, you want the species to have these kind of gradual habitat zones to maintain the marshlands and also to protect the levee that's behind them. And so there are things that we can do that we've built and things that we're planning on building that would include some of these ecosystem benefits as part of the levee infrastructure, and that way utilizing kind of natural, as was mentioned in the question, kind of green infrastructure or nature-based solutions or whatever you want to call it, but have it as part of the levee infrastructure.
Great, thank you. How does OneShoreline determine what projects to participate in with other municipal entities and districts?
Yeah, so we are new. We were just started about 16 months ago. We have a small staff, a couple project managers. We'll probably be adding one more soon. There's myself, and we have finance manager. But that's a great question, and there are a lot of needs out there. And I would say there are a few things that we focus on. One is we're looking for projects that have meaningful objectives and achievable outcomes. And so, you know, what is the objective of the project? Is it something that will satisfy long-term resilience? That would be an important factor. Is there more than one jurisdiction involved? Doesn't have to be the case, but I think the greatest value added of the district is when it involves multiple cities, so that we can help to coordinate, to fund, and address some of the technical issues associated with aligning and connecting different jurisdictions. And then finally, is there a lot of local support for an effort? And is there a clear district role that adds value? Many of these projects are great projects that the cities have already, or the county has in unincorporated areas. But is there value added by having another agency that's regional to become involved in the project? If there is, and there's local support, as well as these other kind of technical and political factors, then it's a good fit. And so an example is Redwood Shores, actually, where Redwood Shores is it may seem like it's mostly Redwood City, and it is mostly Redwood City, but San Carlos has a big chunk of it. Belmont has part of it. There's a county airport, Samtrans bus terminal or facility. So it really is multi-jurisdictional, and the district is kind of a natural fit for bringing those entities together on a broad project like that.
Thank you. And I have one last question about Bay Marsh restoration. Can you address how Bay Marsh restoration efforts help protect the shoreline and prevent flooding? And where and when are we doing these types of efforts?
It can help to reduce flooding. One of the things that I think Paul mentioned was the action of wind and waves on levees, and that has to be part of the calculation. And marshes that front levees can absorb the water and the energy from the waves before they hit the levees, and so they actually can act to reduce the need for levee maintenance over a long period of time. And of course, they absorb water. They also absorb carbon. Actually, marshes are great areas to sequester carbon. So there's multiple benefits of the marshes. A lot of the marsh work is being done right now off of East Palo Alto and Menlo Park. And there are former salt ponds there, especially north of Highway 84 between the Dumbarton Bridge and Marsh Road, that are being transitioned into managed ponds and then tidal marsh. And in fact, the project that I mentioned before at the intersection of those two, the district project starting construction this month, is contributing to the creation of tidal wetlands there. There's also opportunities around Redwood Shores, and we're just starting to understand that. We're working with a research project that's out of UC Santa Cruz to take a look at the marshes around Redwood Shores and some other areas of the county to see what is the flood protection benefit of restoring those marshes, aside from the ecosystem benefits. We recognize that, but just in terms of flood protection, what is that benefit? So there's a group of researchers at UC Santa Cruz that's working with us to identify that. So a lot of opportunities.
Great, thank you. And I have no more questions, but do Paul or Azalea or Len, do you have any final thoughts?
Thank you very much. Thanks to the League of Women Voters for hosting it, and Margie especially for handling the questions. We appreciate the opportunity to get the word out, and hopefully folks can attend one of the future meetings.
Yes, likewise, we'd like to thank you for joining and definitely for hosting this forum. And if you have any questions, please, you can feel free to email.
Thank you. I'm actually going to throw it to our chapter president, Marie Baldassari, to close the evening.
All right. Well, thank you, Margie. In closing, please join me in thanking our speakers, the following representatives from the City of San Mateo, Councilmember Diane Papan and Azalea Mitch, who is the Acting Public Works Director. And we were pleased to have Paul Nagengast representing the Foster City of Levee project. Plus our special thanks to Len Materman, CEO of OneShoreline, the San Mateo County Flood and Sea Level Rise Resiliency District. So I hope you'll be able to join us for the next forum on April 29th at 7 p.m. And it will focus on the impacts of climate change of Redwood City, and that's south of Whipple, Menlo Park, as well as East Palo Alto. And if you'd like to look at tonight's presentation again or share it with others, you can view it in English and in Spanish on YouTube. Plus, if any questions, you have more questions that come to mind after we say good night, feel free to ask them. Just send them to oneshoreline.org/LWV-forums, plural, and they'll answer your questions. So with that, thank you again and have a good evening.